think in almost every case, any of the thinkers featured in the book would have claimed the label themselves, or do. Not everyone is in past tense.
Right. And then somebody decided that they did not qualify. Tell us about who decided that liberal, black, progressive, feminist, and gay self-identified evangelicals were not actually evangelicals.
This at different times it happened in different ways. So the arc of the 20th century evangelical movement in the U.S. context, which is what the primary focus here. Early on, in the early chapter, moving from introduction to the chapter about liberal evangelicals, which is one of the most interesting chapters, I think.
I agree. And one that people don't know that story much.
In certain kinds of ways, right, is that this is a label that evolved over time, and a category and an identity that evolved over time. And in all of these definitional debates about what it means to be evangelical, historians in particular look back to say evangelicalism is this kind of strange trans-denominational thing that happens in certain places in certain times, and you see it crop up here and there, and it has roots in revivalism, but also things like Puritanism, and it's this like thing that moves across denominations. But in the 20th century context, you get this kind of officialization of what it means to be an official card-carrying capital E evangelical. The problem is there's never, as this nebulous cross-denominational thing, there is no evangelical pope, there's no evangelical Vatican, there isn't a universally agreed upon list of card-carrying members and criteria. But you have institutions that crop up and try to do that in some way. So in one of the early chapters of this story of 20th century evangelicalism is the establishment of the institutional bellwethers of 20th century evangelical movement, places like institutions like the National Association of Evangelicals. So one criteria there, or one deciding factor, would be a official evangelical is a member of the NAE, or an evangelical is someone who reads Christianity Today, the magazine that becomes the kind of like center ring of 20th century evangelical thought, or who goes to certain kinds of schools. So in some ways, those who get to decide what it means to be evangelical are the architects behind this network that becomes the 20th century evangelical world. Those who would be, to get to the very nitty-gritty specifics, so there would be those who have the power to decide, would be those who are writing the statements of faith for an institution like Fuller Seminary, or who are the presidents of institutions like the NAE or the Evangelical Theological Society. Whoever it is who is setting the criteria for these institutional representatives are the ones who in some ways have the power to decide. At other times and in other places, in the 20th century and 21st century evangelical story, it works in a kind of populist, almost by like the decision of the masses, right? Like what the evangelical masses buy and decide as their leaders and things ends up influencing. And sometimes you get a tension between those things where your quote unquote average evangelical and the evangelical masses is interested in something. An example that I used for promotional stuff for Erdman's recently is Beth Moore. Beth Moore is one of the most influential religious leaders of the past several decades. And then you have this tension between all of these people who love and adore her as an influential religious teacher, and this hierarchy of self-appointed gatekeepers who say who have essentially pushed her out of the denomination because she transgressed the unofficial orthodoxy. So it works in different ways.
Rachel Howard Evans would be another example. If evangelicalism is a consumer culture, then people whose products are widely consumed become significant, but a lot of times they are not the officially recognized authorities, and they pose a threat to the authorities.